Charles, would you ever consider writing a book, and what would it involve? I've thought about writing a few books, so I really do want to write a book on governance, and that's the first kind of in the queue. And then at some point when I retire, I'd like to write memoirs of all the things I've seen and done, and go through all of that. I never particularly thought that I, as a person, was so incredibly interesting. I just build stuff and I enjoy people, and that's great. But apparently, there's Charles the persona and there's Charles the person, and it's a very strange thing. Everybody in the blockchain space at the moment seems to have an opinion on me, one way or the other, negative or positive, and they just feel very comfortable sharing that opinion. In some cases, beyond the bounds of decency and publishing things and so forth, and that fine. But at the end of the day, does that in any meaningful way actually change the things that I've built? It's all out there. The critics of me, they seem to conveniently forget Cardano and IO and like the last 6 years of my life and all the places I've done and been. And it's just bizarre. It's as if it's like 2014 or something like that. Okay. And it's deeply frustrating at times. It's crazy, to have such a gap between how you perceive yourself to be and how you perceive that you treat others, and then the common notions in certain circles. And a lot of people have reached out to me and told me, "Hey, don't let it bother you. The work continues. Just keep moving forward." And there's a lot of truth in that advice. But every human has built in this need for justice, or this need for vindication, or this "I have to tell you what the real story is." But the reality is that the attacks and the misrepresentations, they're against a person who doesn't exist. They're a collective construction of the criticism, ideas, and hope streams, whatever, of group of people. And so go attack that person. And once you realize it's a different person, it really just rolls right off of you. You don't really think too much about it. I only let it bother me when actually it seems to hurt the commercialization of the projects I work on or the people that I work with. Some of them are deeply frustrated, but for the most part, people seem to be able to keep the work and keep going. And, nothing has ever happened that, in my view, has escalated to that point. Now, in terms of writing a book, it has to be valuable to the reader. It's not useful to just focus on feelings and thoughts and salacious gossip and these things. There has to be some wisdom that's been validated in the thread. There has to be something productive for it to stand the test of time. When I began this podcast earlier, I talked about this idea of wisdom being how one should use their time, and all these things. I've been interested in focus and time management, about the efficiency of one's use of time. Those kinds of things, those tools for life, and examples of their applications and where they provide value. I think those are important. I'm starting to become increasingly connected to the arc of history. I'm not connected to a point where I can influence it, but I am in the room or in events that actually have meaningful significance, like I've been around in the Ethiopian Civil War and all these things, but we're small players in that respect. And I often think, well, what if we weren't? What if the things we do, the things we build at some juncture or point actually start influencing and changing the arc of history? At that point, then I think that's meaningful to discuss, because there's social value in the thought process that led to the decisions that we made. So I started keeping a journal and really trying to keep it up to date and invest time in it, just in case I have to go back, because innocent decisions or, observations or these things at the time could turn out to be the critical factor in something very significant. And before the critics dogpile on, say, "Oh, this is narcissism," or something like that, well, let's say that we end up building the national ID system for a country, and that ends up being the basis for e-voting, and that ends up being the basis for all e-voting in the entire world. I mean, there's not outside the realm of possibility. Cardano was just an idea in 2015, and now it's a network with millions of people worth tens of billions of dollars that's growing at a very rapid pace. If that continues, it could be worth $1 trillion. and have a billion people in 20 years or 30 years. That could happen. Who knows? In which case, the influence that would have, the industries it would control, it could be the back end of nation states. So historians will ask, business leaders will ask, how did we get here? What was the point of that? So it is important just to write things down just in case that does occur, in which case you can go back with some degree of objectivity, or at least the subjectivity of the moment, as opposed to the hindsight of the future.